Thanks so much, Sudhir. I've read both. Obviously, I've read my own book, but I've also had the opportunity to read Sudhir's book, and it's very nice in a way because we are covering the same kind of material with the same level of sympathy. So it's actually, for me, I think we could write 50 books about the farmers' protest because it was so huge and there were so many things going on. So it came out at the same time, but we were not writing together or anything like that. So when I found out, I was like, Brum told me, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. But we have quite a different lens. And so this is quite important because for me, I'm not based in India. It was COVID times, I couldn't fly here. So this book is just as much written by Navkiran and Happy, who is here, because actually these guys were sitting there at the borders and doing what I consider the work. And when I first met them, I said, you should write a book about this, but they're too busy doing other things in their lives. So they didn't write a book about this. So I felt the same kind of obligation that someone should write about this amazing event. But equally, it was a difficult process to write when I lived so far away, and my view of the protest was very distant. So the first thing is, this is a view from the UK. It's a view from the Punjabi Sikh diaspora. And so that's quite a different perspective from your perspective might be. So maybe I wouldn't call India a democracy, for example, from where I sit. Yeah, so that's the sort of that's one big difference, I think, in the way you may have written and I've written. Even though broadly I think we're very sympathetic to the protest, I'm a little bit, my view of the protest is not so much, even though it's called Indian Farmers Protest, and the story is of the protest, but my view is very much from the margins of the protest. So it's not really a view from, let's say the perspective of, and actually this, I wouldn't want to call the SKM, the Samyukt Kisan Morcha, which was the organizing umbrella body, one single thing, but definitely there was a leadership in the SKM. And so this view is not the view of that leadership. In fact, at some point towards the end, I start calling this leadership a very typical kind of farm union leadership, which is always willing to compromise with the state. And those of you who are maybe students of history, you may not know, or you may know, that way before the internet and mobile phones in the 1980s, 85, there was a huge protest in Delhi, 85, yeah, at the boat club, where 300,000 to 1 million farmers are said to have protested before the advent of social media and phones and all this. But they protest for 5 days. They could have actually taken down the government. After 5 days, they wandered back to wherever they came from without any compromise, because I think Rajiv Gandhi, or the ruling power at the time, called up the farm leadership and they capitulated. And this was going on all of the time of this year. The farm leadership were in talks with the government to try and find a compromise. The people who are the backbone of this, they resisted. The people who were sat on the streets, they were the ones who resisted. And in some senses, within those groups of people that were sitting on those roads, this book is really looking at those margins, looking at the margins in terms of women's voices, in terms of caste voices, and in terms of the margins of agricultural production. So I think, again, sitting far away, for me, when I heard those voices, I wanted to represent those voices in relationship to the narrative that was going on. And what I heard from those voices was a big criticism of the way that things are, the way that the existing social order is in India, the way the existing social order is in relationship to agriculture. And so it's that criticism or that critique that you will find in this book, alongside the same kind of narrative that you told. So I do obviously talk about the protests, I talk about some of the details of the protest, but it's always with this eye, because the other person who's not in the room, who is the co-author, you will call him Kranti, but I will call him Rindeep Madoke, whose pictures are in the book, and this is his book on the cover. It's his picture on the cover. He's a photographer, not a particularly PhD or sociologist. He's a visual artist, but his view on the protest, from his caste position, from his political position, it was very important. Like, that informs in many ways the ways in which this is written. So it's a very specific take. I think it's I think it's quite different from your argument, but it's the same material. So, you'll get the same stories in both books, but the argument I make is quite distinct. And that's a lot to do with, I think, our positionality. You're in JNU in India. I'm in the University of Warwick. I'm in the UK. I have some freedoms. You have some accesses. So you get a different perspective. And that also, like, for the students here, and thank you for hosting, this is really important when you're doing social science work, is to understand the positionality of the author, and that's not individual, that's just the social configuration of the author, the social configuration of the person who is giving you this text. And so because of that positionality, I probably make a few controversial claims in the book, but those are the claims that I am going to talk about, because it might be more interesting, in terms of a conversation. So the first thing I argue is that the Green Revolution was a bit of a fraud. And you can't really say this in India other than in a safe space. So I renamed this as Green Ecocide. And when I launched this book in Punjab, I was terribly criticized for saying the Green Revolution was a fraud. But you could, again, the social context of the people who were criticizing were large and medium-sized farmers who were criticizing. Because for them, certainly, the Green Revolution meant an increase in income. But if we look at the totality of the Green Revolution, it leads to a decline in the totality of crops that are available for the people of India as a whole. Not for the middle-income farmers, not for middle-income folks, but for the totality. And this research has been done. There are PhDs out there which look analytically at the impact of the Green Revolution. Even the increases in productivity occur more because of tube wells than because of new seeds. This research is unpublished PhDs. So the other criticism, which is quite mute in this book because I'm getting too old now to attack my colleagues in different disciplines, is that agricultural economists and development economists, who are pretty much very dominant in Punjab, they kind of suppress a lot of this information. Even the 1965 famine, which led to Indira Gandhi, that has been quite rightly kind of criticized as being a media-generated event, and a famine in Bihar. But we have no Green Revolution where the famine is. So how is the Green Revolution supposed to resolve the famine? Even simple logic, even outside of technological logic, tells us that this is not the way maybe it was. Now, I'm not someone who is going to do that original archival research. All of the Swaminathan papers are available at the NCBS, the National College for Biological Sciences in Bangalore. Someone needs to go through those papers and have a look at what was going on, because I think there's a lot more going on. When I was there 4 months ago, and the very lovely archivist opened up some of these papers for me, in those papers, he found letters in English from Punjabi farmers to Swaminathan saying, please, will you give us the H1 variety seed? And I was like, who are these farmers writing letters in English to Swaminathan? And this should again give you a sense of the kind of class, caste configuration of beneficiaries of the Green Revolution. Because if these guys are already accessing this kind of world, we know that this is privileging a particular dominant caste, class configuration of farmers. The work needs to be done. So in the book, I provocatively say we shouldn't say Green Revolution, we should say Green Ecocide. No farmer, I imagine, from a middle or high income family is going to agree with my classification in this way. But as a sociologist, I can put this out there as something that people should criticize, or maybe they should go and find further evidence of. So that's the first point, that's the first kind of claim that I make in relationship to this struggle. This is not my opinion plucked from the air. This is from watching the farmers' stages for many hundreds and hundreds of hours of the speeches that take place on those stages. And on those stages, again, at the margins of the SKM, you find farmers' unions talking this language. You find speeches, which I quote in the book, where people will say, we didn't want those tractors. Rice is not something we grow in Punjab. This was imposed on us. And if we need to change, the government need to be involved in that change. These are speeches on the stages. These are then speeches that you hear afterwards. And in the submission to the policy reports that have come out since the protest, the Punjab government did a policy report. In the submission by, which is the union, Deep Singh Wala? The Kirti Kisan Union. So this is from a Kisan union. They make a substantive argument for an ecological approach to farming in Punjab. It is watered down in the final report. So there are farmers' unions. Obviously, the speeches that I'm quoting are from the Bharatiya Kisan Union, Ekta Ugrahan. I go to the International Women's Day event that they hold. On their stage, the leadership is saying, we should stop planting rice. How can we afford to stop planting rice? This is a major shift from this because of this protest. I don't think before this protest, any union would have the nerve to publicly tell their membership, stop growing rice. How can you say that to someone whose livelihood and living depends on rice? So I think this is something that came from the movement. Is this something that is widely accepted within the agricultural economist literature? And I know many of those characters myself. No, it's not. But we should also trace, and again, I can say this in a meeting rather than in a book, we should also trace the opinions of many of the Punjab agricultural economists about these laws. Because initially, their opinions were not very negative about these laws. Those opinions changed. And you know who I'm talking about. Those opinions changed because of the protesters. Suddenly they felt, well, we have to not say that these laws are great, because they are great for a particular class of farmer. I mean, we shouldn't deny this. Those laws were beneficial for a particular class of farmers who, by this time, the political parties were all kind of in agreement. The Punjabi political parties, Punjab political partners, Haryana. So the movement itself transforms the landscape. And for me, the one thing that I wanted to highlight was this idea that the Green Revolution we need to examine more carefully. And this examination is not being done by agricultural economists. So hopefully political scientists, sociologists we always hope for, will be the people who will go forward to do this kind of examination. The second thing I emphasize, and I've kind of 5 minutes, always 5 minutes. The second thing, okay, so then I'm not going to do the second thing. I'll tie that in, and then I'll come back to make a final point. So tied in with that is agroecology. So some kind of requirement or need for us to really think seriously about organic farming, or what we call here natural farming, I think it's called here. Again, very minor voice within the protest. Still, the Kirti Kisan Union was very strong on this. There is a problem with agroecology because of the way it's associated with, India. 5,000 years ago, we had organic farming. What are you coming to teach us about organic farming? It's associated with a particular narrative, and that narrative is something that we all may not wish to, we're challenging that narrative in other places. So why are we promoting that narrative in this place? So we need to be careful. So agroecology has to be, from my point, it has to be eco-socialist. So you can't just have ecology without socialism, because ecology can be, like ancient Indian ecology, rather than using other language for that. So that's the other thing that I push for. Who are the people who are experimenting with this? People who have very, very little land, or people who have captured land. So for me, the farmers' protest, the spirit of it doesn't carry on with the farmers' unions. So in the conclusion, in a very similar way, we both do this. In the conclusion, we talk about Delhi 2.0, when the farmers' union come again. We talk about the farmers going into formal politics. Very bad idea. They fail quite miserably. For me, the people who carry on the light, the hope, are a group called the Zameen Prapti Sangharsh Committee in Punjab. And this group, which is a Dalit-led organization, just last year, they capture 900 acres of land in Sangrur district. And they were going to distribute this land to Dalit families. Obviously, that hasn't happened. The state has repressed them. But they definitely carry on some of the spirit that was in this. And I haven't talked about gender here, partly because I have, someone who was teaching me about how gender was working on the farmers at the farmers' protest. But again, in North India, this is the first time we see substantive involvement of women at the protest. Does that change gender relations within the rural households? Does that change gender relations more broadly? Probably not. But within the context of the farmers' protest itself, certainly we saw shifts in gender relations, which, again, first time this has happened in North India. That doesn't transpire to land transfer. So it doesn't transpire to suddenly women inheriting land in rural parts of India. And it hasn't transpired, I think, in kind of increases in kind of employment in these areas. But certainly it's the farmers' protest itself which showed that gender relations aren't static. That given the context, you can also tackle that. I'm not saying that this was a utopian space, but I am saying that in struggle, in this kind of struggle, you can see utopian spaces formed. And I suppose that's because basically I'm a cultural sociologist, so I had to bring in some of that idea that there was this utopian space formed during this period. And there I'll leave it at that. Thanks.